Gimel, Fug, of course. So we're up to two lines. Well, I don't know what we're up to, but a good place to start is the last two words on Pei Bet Amud Bet, Amarav. Okay, so our Mishnah on Pei Aleph said an interesting halacha, which is we're referring. And we're going to finish this today, by the way. So if you had enough of these gemaras today, it's all finishes today, and we go back to Yevamot tomorrow. New parak. The question was people who have, I would say, ambiguous genitalia, right? The tumtum and androgynous. And if there's probably a lot of background where I am, so just let me know if it's not loud enough or clear enough. So remember the two categories where tumtum was someone who doesn't have, you can't tell what they are, presumably because they have essentially, it's not visible on externally what genitalia they have. So they don't have, obviously there's a way to urinate and defecate, but there's just not visible genitalia. There's something probably under the skin. And we're going to talk today about an example we did surgery, right? We talked about this before. And you opened them up and revealed whether they had male or female genitalia. That's a tumtum. An androgynous is someone who has both, right? So it has some semblance of a penis, some semblance of a vagina, exactly what, and it could be a continuum, right? You can have more or less of each. But there's basically ambiguous genitalia. So our Mishnah said today is that androgynous, where am I? Androgynous nosei avalonisa, right? An androgynous who can get married, but you can't marry an androgynous. So basically, androgynous is like a male for that purpose. Androgynous can marry a woman, but can't be married by a man, basically. That's what our Mishnah said, okay? So basically, essentially saying the androgynous who has, again, both sort of has some form of vagina, but is a male. Amarav, leta, now top of Pegimel, leta lematnitim mekami braita. Our Mishnah is wrong. Our Mishnah is thrown out in front of a braita, because the braita actually says something different than our Mishnah. What does the braita say? The Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer in the braita, androgynous birya b'fnei atzmahu. An androgynous is its own set. It's not male. It's not zachar and nekeva. It's its own birya. The lo hachriu bo chachamim im zachar and nekeva. Chachamim did not conclude whether you should treat, and this is one way to read this, you should treat an androgynous like a zachar and nekeva. So basically, you don't know, essentially. So this is, Tosfos, as you could see here, is very bothered by this, and as are all the other Rishonim, because the question is, does it mean it's its own thing, or does it mean we just don't know? Right? Is it a safek? There's two categories, zachar and nekeva, or is there a third category of androgynous? The implication is, Tosfos does not agree with what I'm about to tell you, but nonetheless, the other Rishonim do, is that androgynous is its own category. Right? That this is a person who's born with male and female sexual characteristics. You treat it like something else. The question is, do you treat halachot of a male or female? And they couldn't tell. And this matters like for nida. Right? Let's say this person has bleeding from their vaginal orifice. Are they a nida or not? Let's say they have discharge, right? Are they a zav? Are they a zava? Like all these questions, and obviously you'd go to chumrah, but you just don't know. But according to
that goes against Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it can only be male, really.
Correct. I mean, there's a machloket about this. Correct. So there was a machloket, and our Mishnah said clearly that it's just a male. But what we're saying now is that the Braita says not the case, and our Mishnah is wrong. Let the lematnitin become a Braita. We go with the Braita, where basically so then it becomes a safek, right? Because if a male, well, not a male, if an androgynous gives kiddushin to a woman, you don't know if that's a man, in which case it would be a kiddushin or not, and so it would be a safek. You'd give a get, all the halachot. But unlike our Mishnah, which made very clear that it was a male. Says the Gemara, why would you throw out our Mishnah? Because there's a Braita that disagrees. Why don't you do the opposite? Adarabba. Let the Braita mikami matanita. Throw out our Braita in front of the Mishnah, right? Why don't you say that the Braita is wrong and our Mishnah was a later statement of the same halacha? Now, just to point out, that it's not so much that there's arguing. Obviously, people could argue, but the Mishnah was Rabbi Yossi and this Braita is Rabbi Yossi, right? So the issue is that it's the same person. It's Rabbi Yossi. Says the Gemara, well, if you notice in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say the halacha, right? It's Rabbi Yossi, where am I? Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon omrim androgynous kohen shenasa gives truma. However, the fact that midashafke Rabbi Yossi the Bar Zugay since Rav Yossi dropped his partner, right? Shmamina hadarbe. You see that he reversed his opinion, meaning the fact that he says this alone implies that this is his definitive opinion. That he taught something with Rabbi Shimon, he gave it more consideration, changed his mind, and then retaught it alone, and that's more definitive. That's Rav. Shmuel says, I disagree. Shmuel Amar, let the Lebraita Mikami Matnita. Throw out the Braita in front of our Mishnah. Meaning the Braita, which says that Rabbi Yossi was uncertain, is wrong, and the Mishnah is correct. The Mishnah says that it's for sure male, for sure Zachar. Says Gemara again, why? Adarabba, say the opposite. Let the Matnita Mikami Braita. Because the Shamina Le Shmuel, Shmuel is a famous opinion, which we had in Megillah, the Chayish the Chida. He worries about every little individual opinion. So why don't you worry about this opinion in the Braita? That's a safek. Again, this has huge implications, right? Because if a person who's an androgynous gives kedushin to a woman, our Mishnah said if he's a Kohen, his father would, it was a Kohen, I guess. Were a Kohen. If their father was a Kohen, then they can feed truma to this woman because it's as if it's a real marriage, right? It is a real marriage. So that has huge implications. As well, only when Shmuel said that you worry about yichida, that's when it doesn't argue with the Mishnah. That's when it doesn't go against the Mishnah. Okay, since it argues with the Mishnah, you ignore it basically. So therefore, according to Shmuel, the halacha is like our Mishnah. Then according to Rabbi Yossi, an androgynous is a male, a zachar, and he can get married, and his wife can eat truma. And according to Rav, the Mishnah is wrong, basically, and you go with the Braita, which is that it's its own category, and therefore it's a safek. You don't know for sure. Now, Amri Be Rav, we're like 10 lines down, right? They said in the house of Rav, Mishmei de Rav, in the name of Rav, Halacha Rabbi Yossi bandrogynous. We pass like Rabbi Yossi in the case of androgynous and in the case of harkava. We're going to go through all these cases. Harkava means grafting trees before Shemitah. And Shmuel says, again, good morning, James. They said Bei Rav in the name of Rav. Halacha is like Rabbi Yossi in these two cases, our Mishnah of androgynous and harkava. And we'll talk about these all in today's daf. Shmuel says, right, so that was Bei Rav. Shmuel says halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, bikoshi. Koshi means labor, basically, and bikidush. And kiddush, which we'll see what that means as well, it means kalayim, but we'll see what it is. What are all these cases? So androgynous, first of all, hadama. Androgynous, again, is the case of Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi says that a person who has basically both genitalia is treated like a male and can marry a woman and can do kiddushin and can give truma, male for all purposes. Harkava, what's the case of grafting? It's not. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Shviya, about Shemitah, where it says, Ein notin, you can't plant, Ein marvrichin, you can't, what's mavrich? Mavrich is, mavrich is when you put it in the ground. So mavrich is when you take a branch, basically, and you re-enter it into the ground so that it grows as like basically its own new tree. So it's essentially a way of expanding the growth of the tree. In markivim, which is grafting, where you take two branches and put them together, right, so, and tie them together. You can't do any of these actions, which are essentially planting, erev shvi'it, pachut mishloshim yom lefnei Rosh Hashanah. You can't do them within 30 days of Rosh Hashanah, because there's a concept of tosefet shvi'it, right? The Shemitah doesn't just start on Rosh Hashanah itself, but 30 days before, you can't do actions that would be prohibited on Shemitah. Says the Mishnah, if you planted, or you grafted, or did this thing, ya'akar, you got to uproot it, you got to take it out of the ground. It's prohibited. You cannot allow that thing to grow, and you can't enjoy it. Rabbi Yehuda says that, one second, it's more complicated. Because kol harkava she'ena koletet b'shlosha yamim shov ena koletet. Anything that you plant that doesn't start growing within 3 days is going to die. Right? If you plant or graft or do something and it doesn't start showing roots, again, you probably can't see them yet, but start showing roots within 3 days, that's not going to take. And so you basically have 3 days from when you planted until you know whether it's growing. Okay? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon said, and this is what Rabbi Shimon that we're quoting, Shtei Shabbatot. No, it takes 2 weeks. So basically you get a 2-week window when you plant something for it to attach or it's going to die or it's going to not attach. When Amar Rabbi Barav, according to the one who says it takes 30 days to know if something is going to grow, you need actually to plant, you need to wait before Shemitah 60 days. Tzarech shloshim u'shloshim, right? You need 30 plus 30, meaning you need 30 days as Tosefet Shemitah, 30 days midrabanan to add on to Shemitah, and 30 days because that's how long it takes for something to plant, to grow. So if you plant something within 60 days of Shemitah, you have to get rid of it. So meaning you cannot plant it if it's a tree. There's different rules about vegetables, but that by a tree. So that's the first opinion. The Divrei Omer Shlosha, according to the opinion that you need 3 days for it to grow. Then Tzarech Shlosha U'Shloshim, you need 33 days. Divrei Omer Shtei Shabbatot, which is Rabbi Yossi's opinion, which is what we're quoting here, 2 weeks. Tzarech Shtei Shabbatot U'Shloshim, you need 30 days plus 2 weeks, which is, I guess, 54 days, right? 44 days, sorry. 44 days.
All right.
Thank you. And so that's where Rav said the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. So basically the halacha is 2 weeks, and you can't plant trees within 44 days of Shemitah. And Shmuel said the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi in the cases of koshi and kiddush. Koshi, which means labor, right? The difficulty of labor, and kiddush, which is kilayim, right? That's pasuk says pen tukdash, what you plant in the carrot. What are these cases? Koshi, if everyone has it, we're 7 lines from the bottom. It's not, as the Mishnah says in Nida, kama yehe kishua. What is the amount of time that a woman is in labor, or it's not really labor, but it's that if she has bleeding, right, just discharge of blood, let's say, before birth, that you can attribute it to the early pangs of labor, that it's either early labor or it's already starting to give birth, and you don't assume that it's related to bleeding from nida or ziva. Remember, right? Remember, the halacha is that a woman who is a nida, right? Then her 7 days are up. Her days of ziva start. It's 11 days of ziva. If she bleeds 3 days in a row, she becomes a zavad gedola during those 11 days, and then she doesn't become tahar until 7 days pass without any bleeding. So it could be 2 years if she constantly bleeds, right? I mean, that would be very unfortunate, right? But it could. There's no end to that time. It has to be 7 clean days before she becomes tahar. Let's say this happens, say 2 months before childbirth, right? And then she is in her 7 days that she's waiting, and she has blood. That says the Mishnah, you can attribute that to labor, and it doesn't count for dam ziva. So basically, she becomes tahar, right? How long before birth can you say that? So kama yehe kishua. So Meir says it could be a long time. 40, 50 days, right? She can start having early labor. Again, I'm saying early labor, but it's not real labor because labor wouldn't continue for 40 days, right? But early bleeding related to the process of childbirth, 40 or 50 days.
All these are like analogous cases. Is that what we're trying to do here?
No, we're just posking like Rabbi Yossi. So we're just basically giving lists of where we posking like Rabbi Yossi. We're going to get Rabbi Yossi here.
Okay.
So on the surface, it has nothing to do with the case of androgynous.
No, I understand, but these are being brought to show that we're going by Rabbi Yossi.
Correct. It's just a list. The Rab gave a list. The Rabbi Paskin and Shmuel gave his own list.
Okay.
So the Mishnah says 40 or 50 days. Rabbi Yehuda then says in the Mishnah, Dayach Chodesha, you only get the month. And this again, it's a complicated Gemara in Nida, but probably it means only the month of the cycle, basically. Not even 30 days, but like within that month, meaning going from the moon. So that Chodesh. And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim, Ein Kishua Yoter Mishtei Shabbatot. It can't be more than 2 weeks. And that's how Shmuel says we paskin. That according to, that's like Rabbi Yossi, that a woman can only attribute bleeding related to childbirth within 2 weeks of childbirth. And the final case was Kiddush.
Well,
Kiddush means client.
how do you know it's 2 weeks before childbirth until childbirth?
Right, but you'll know after the fact.
That's true. That's good enough?
I mean, so you'll have to be Mesupak in between, but then you'll know afterwards. I mean, the challenge, again, this was a whole Gemara Nida, which is a woman who's Yuledet B'toch Ziva, right? Because remember, the Torah is this great halacha, halacha, this important halacha, that a woman who gives birth is then tahor.
Yeah.
But the problem that we discussed in Nida extensively is what if she was already a Zava when she gave birth?
Right.
This is the case, right? And you won't know till afterwards, right? So that's what Rabbi Yossi would say.
Okay.
Says the Gemara, what the fourth case is Kiddush. Kiddush means kilayim. What's the case? Znan, this is a very a vindictive neighbor. Many of us probably have had neighbors like this before, right? You have a neighbor who has a field full of grain, okay? And you are next to them and you're very annoyed because they never mow their lawn or something, right? So you get a good idea, and you say, I'm going to take my grapevine, which is in my field next to their field of grain, and I'm going to extend it over their field of grain, making them kilayim, right? So I will be misachich gafno agabi tvuato shel chavero. I'll make a trellis and have my grapevine go over his field of grain, which will of course make his field of grain puzzle because it's kilayim, right? Once the roots and everything from the trellis come down, it'll puzzle his field. So
But
says
it's
the
not
Mishnah,
his.
it's kilayim, right?
No, but he doesn't own the grapes.
Sure, but it's kilayim, right? It's like, so anyway, says the Mishnah, we'll discuss it. Says the Mishnah, Hariza Kiddush, that then the field became kilayim because you mix grapes and the grain together. And chayav b'achrayuto, but I gotta pay him for the grain because I've ruined his grain, right? I've ruined his field. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon Omrim, from the page, Ein Adam Oser Davar She'eino Shelo. What do you mean? I can't passel what's not mine. So the fact that I did this doesn't make it kilayim, and I don't have to pay him, but I didn't do anything basically. I got to get rid of my grapes, I guess. So that's where Shmuel said, "Be passel like Rabbi Yossi." Now, there's a very nice Tosfos here as well, where he asks, "What do you mean? You can't aser davar she'eino shelo?" This Tosfos on the top. If I walk into your house and pour milk into your chicken, right? What are you going to say? It doesn't become basar b'chalav because I can't aser what's not mine. Right? I mean, so Tosfos makes a distinction here between kilayim is not. There's a lot of intent that has to do with kilayim, right? Meaning a lot of what kilayim is did you intend to do it, and what was your desire to put it together? And that's the real thought here, is that since it's not the desire of the person who planted the field, it doesn't make it kilayim, which is a very complicated halacha of kilayim, making it's not like basar b'chalav, where you just physically do it. And Tosfos makes some points here about cases where Tosfos has an example of where you see your vegetables growing and you say, "Oh, I'll get it later." And as long as you say, "I'll get it later," you didn't intend for it to grow down and mix, and therefore it's not kilayim. So it's obviously a little more complicated than I'm making it, but this is the mission. And that's where Shmuel says Yosef. Now, as the Gemara on the top of today's daf, what about the opposite way? Rav paskin like Rabbi Yossi by androgynous and by what was the second case? Androgynous and nitiyah. Sorry. What about Shmuel? Did Shmuel agree or not agree that Rabbi paskin like Rabbi Yossi in those cases? So Iboilu, top line. We asked the question: the androgynous mali amar Shmuel. The Shmuel agreed by androgynous. Remember, Rav's psak, according to Rabbi Yossi, which we think was going to our Mishnah, was that an androgynous is a male, essentially, it's a zachar, and can marry a woman. So Amar, what does Shmuel say? Tashmad, Amar Shmuel, Rav Anan. Shmuel said, Rav Anan, you know what? Let the Braita, Mikame Dematnitim, the Braita is wrong, that Rabbi Yossi was not sure, and our Mishnah is correct. Rabbi Yossi was sure that an androgynous can marry a woman and be regular, treated like a zachar in that way. Harkava, what about the case of grafting? Mali Amar Shmuel, does Shmuel agree with Rav Yossi that it's 2 weeks or not? Tashmad, Amali Shmuel, Rav Anan, Shmuel said to Rav Anan, to me, you should teach Kimanda Amar Shlosha Ushloshim, which is not like Rav Yossi. Remember, Rav Yossi said 2 weeks and 30. He said teach 3 days and 30. So clearly he doesn't paskin like Rav Yossi. What about the opposite? Where Shmuel said the halacha is like Rav Yossi, what does Rav say? Koshi, by the case of Koshi, remember, of labor, or as I said, bleeding before childbirth. Mali Amarav, we don't know. Take means, we don't know the answer. And what about Kiddush? What about the final case of Kilayim? What would Rav say if a vindictive neighbor planted his grapes on top of someone else's wheat? So Mali Amarav, Amarav Yosef Tashma. In fact, we have a statement which clarifies that. Amarav Huna Amarav in halacha Rabbi Yosef. Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, the halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi. So clearly, Rav holds not like Shmuel, but the halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi. Amrei Abaya said Abaya, well, how do you know that's correct? My chazit samchataha samuchaha. Why don't you rely on the following statement? The Amar of Adar Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Yossi. Rav Adar quoted Rav saying halacha was like Rabbi Yossi. So Rav Huna said it wasn't, but Rav Adar said it was. Amri Bei Rav Manu Rav Huna said back to him, look. The whole statement, if you recall, back when we started this, was that the Bei Rav said in the name of Rav, right? Who are Bei Rav? Bei Rav literally means the house of Rav. But we know that Bei Rav is a code word for Rav Huna. Rav Huna was the authoritative biographer of the house of Rav, right? So it says the Gemara, Manu Bei Rav Manu is Rav Huna. And Rav Huna Amar Ein Halacha. And the Rav Huna, the authoritative source, said the halacha is not like Rav Yossi according to Rav. And so, in fact, they argue about all these cases. So, a little bit of an aside, but these are the 4 cases where Rav and Shmuel have opinions about whether we paskin like Rav Yossi. Okay, let's get back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, again, just to repeat, since we didn't learn yesterday and it's complicated, our Mishnah on Pei Aleph had the complicated case of a tumtum and androgynous, people who are born with ambiguous or unclear genitalia. So the Mishnah said that androgynous is treated like a male, according to Rabbi Yossi, and that's how we paskin according to the Gemara. But what about a tumtum, right? So again, a tumtum is someone who externally you cannot tell, what sexual organs they have, essentially. So our Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda, I'm reading from the Mishnah now. Rabbi Yehuda says a tumtum shenikra, tumtum who was torn open, meaning you basically revealed what was going on internally, and nimsa zachar, and turns out to be male, right? Meaning has male organs. Lo yachlotz. Mishnah said, don't do chalitza because b'nei shehu kisaris. He's like a person who's infertile, because even though he has these organs, he's not capable of having children. So although he's male, according to this, once you reveal that, the saris was male, but the saris is the tumtum is male, but the tumtum is treated like a saris who's castrated, basically, who doesn't have the ability to have children. Says the Gemara, Amar Reb Ami, says Reb Ami, there are very famous scientific cases where that's not true. My Avalei Reb Yehuda. What's Reb Yehuda going to tell you about the very famous Tumtum de Biri? There was a Tumtum in Biri. Rashi's Biri was a place, right? This was a famous case known to everybody of the Tumtum of such and such place. I don't know if anyone has a Mefaresh tells us where Biri might be, but it's a place, right? So there was a Biri, a Tumtum in that place. The Otve Abe Korsei, they put it on the Korsei. Not so clear what Korsei means. I think some Rishonim describe it as basically like a surgical chair, right? Like basically they operated on this person. The Ikra, they opened him up, essentially, they tore him open, and they refashioned his skin. But Olid Sheva Benin, he ended up getting married and having 7 children. So it was a famous case of someone who had successful surgery. Everyone went to that surgeon afterwards, right? So this was essentially, I forget the words, but anyway, this was a successful surgery. So what is Rabbi Yehuda going to tell you? How could you say that every saris, every tumtum is a saris? This guy had 7 children. Amalei, of course, the famous answer the Gemara always gives, Rabbi Yehuda would say, Amalei, you never really know who's the father of the child, right? You should investigate where these kids come from, because I maintain, says Rabbi Yehuda, that you can't have children, and there must be something else going on in that family.
They can't just say it's an exception that proves the rule or something,
I guess
they don't like that.
If it's possible physically, then possible. Just for clarification, like all these halachot, which do have relevance, I think they're not that relevant, not common, but they happen, right? Are complicated because these things might change over time. Like maybe Rabbi Yehuda held it was a saris because the surgical techniques in those days, were not very good, but conceivably you can reevaluate this. And obviously, if these questions come up, you need to get real experts in medical halacha to understand what to do. Tanya now continues the. Sorry.
What would we call a tumtum today?
No, actually. So in the Gemara's terminology, it was someone in which you couldn't tell, right? So you couldn't differentiate. I mean, physically looking at them externally, they obviously are able to urinate and so there's no question something could come out.
Is it a real thing to be born with some kind of skin covering genitalia?
So it is, yeah. I mean, so there's 2 parts, right? One is that it is, anything's possible, as we know. But the second thing is that it's a continuum, right? So some people probably have complete covering. Some people like have partial covering. Some people have what looks like a penis, but it's hard to tell if it's a clitoris. Like it's not, like there's all kinds of gradations of exactly what organs are there. It is, I mean, these things happen. I think they're very rare, but absolutely.
Is the skin like just an extra piece of, like, I never understood the piece of skin. Is it like a foreskin where you can just cut it off and nothing happens, or it's more like a real surgery when you open a person up?
I have to be honest, I don't actually know. I know based on the Gemara, which I would be honest, is probably not the best scientific text. Again, our Gemara is talking here about a case where they cut it off, right? Where they did some kind of, the Mishnah uses the word ikra, you tear it open. So implying that underneath this covering, you can recognize genitalia, essentially. Presumably if you tear too much, you're going to kill the person, right? I mean, I don't think it's simple, right? Because it's not like, but that's what tumtum. So tumtum is literally it means you can't tell. Androgynous is where the person has genitalia that are both, right? They have a vagina. Again, it may be a small, like I don't know what it's connected to. Like I don't know if they have a uterus or not, right? But there is a second entrance, right, of the vagina, and they also have what seems to be a penis. So they have both genitals, right? Our Mishnah, again, clearly said that the androgynous is treated like a male, and that basically it marries, the marriage counts, right? And that the wife can eat truma if it's a kohen, that to chalitza. We'll talk about all these cases, right? So clearly they leaned more towards male. We just had an opinion that you just said that was unclear. That was a birya b'fnei atzma. There's essentially a third category, and not male or female, but an androgynous. And the question then is, how do you treat that third category? The Torah clearly does not have a third category of halacha, of like gender, right? That clearly is a strong term. So there could be a third, I don't know what gender is not a good word, third category of male, female, right? So if there is a category of someone who's born with something that's not distinctly zachar nekeva, the question is, do you treat them? Are they like a zachar, like a nekeva? And we said we weren't sure, according to that opinion of Rabbi Yossi. That's right. The Mishnah did not have that doubt. The Mishnah said, no, you treat this person like a zachar.
So androgynous can't be a nekeva. It's either undetermined or a zachar.
Right. So the opinions that we're quoting is that it's either right. There's no one who says that androgynous is a nekeva, and that, for example, if a man marries an androgynous, that she's married, right? That kind of. There's no opinion like that in our Gemara. I'm not sure. I can't tell you if no one ever holds that opinion in any Breita. I don't think so, but I don't think right. So I think the question is it male or something in between. But to answer your question, James, I don't really know physically how common. I don't think it's common, but I would refer you to Wikipedia, which is where I would.
I don't even know what it's called in English.
I don't either. I'll look. I'll do after Daf. We could do some Wikipedia looking. So, anyways, where are we? Rabbi Yehuda Tanya. We're at the bright. Okay. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Right now, remember in our Mishnah was Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said in our Mishnah that a tumtum shenikra v'nimtza zachar lo yachlotz. Tumtum who had the surgery was found out to be male shouldn't do chalitza because he's like a sris, right? He's not capable of having children. Remember, a sris can't do yibam or chalitza. Says the Braita, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, so he said disagreed with his father, and he said, Omer, tumtum lo yachlotz, tumtum shenat do chalitza, even if you didn't tear them open, right? Remember, Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah said, if you find male genitalia, don't do chalitza. Rabbi Yehuda says, tumtum lo yachlotz, shema yikra v'nimtza sris chama. Maybe you will open them up and turn out that there will be a sris chama. Sris chama is a person who was born infertile. Not born infertile, who became infertile later, right? Through the sun, through a fever, through some other cause. Says the Gemara, what? Well, atu called the nikra zachara, because is it possible? Is it true that everyone who you open will turn out to be zachar? Obviously, it's a safek. Says the Gemara, hachikama. This is what Rabbi Yossi Yehuda is saying. Shema yikrav and insan nikeva. Possibly, this person, this tumtum, is female. Meaning, when you reveal their genitalia, you'll reveal female genital organs. And so therefore they can't do chalitza because it's a woman. And even if it turns out that they're male, they might turn out to be a saris, basically a person who can't have children, and therefore they can't do chalitza for that reason. Says, well, what's the difference? My benayah between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and his father Rabbi Yehuda and the Mishnah who said you can't do it at all. Amar Rava, the real question is the question is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the father, this person is definitely male. so remember, a saris, not a saris, tumtum is definitely treated like a zachar. And
androgynous.
no, we're talking about saris here. A saris. So a saris, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is not, sorry, let me just say it correctly. It's confusing. A saris, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is who is a zachar, meaning who you found out when you tore him open is a zachar, is definitely treated like a saris. Okay? I said all the words wrong again. A tumtum is definitely treated like a saris. Definitely. Meaning that a tumtum cannot do chalitza. And that if there are other brothers there, and a tumtum does chalitza, the chalitza is like nothing happened. The other brothers can then do yibam or chalitza. Or if there's no other brothers, the tumtum doesn't do anything. Because the tumtum cannot do it. He's a saris. Right? That's according to Rabbi Yehuda, the father. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says it's unclear. Shema. According to Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, it's a safek. You can't allow a tumtum to do chalitza because the tumtum may be infertile, right? But you don't know that for sure. And therefore, if, let's say, there's no other brothers, then he should do chalitza because just misafek. And if there are other brothers and he does chalitza, it passes it to the other brothers, again, misafek. So the difference between Rabbi Yossi and his father, Rabbi Yehuda, and his father Rabbi Yehuda, is whether you treat it as a for sure saris, whether you say every tumtum cannot have children, or this child who says that maybe a tumtum can, it's just a safek. Okay, so that's the difference.
If they're doing chalitza, who cares if he's fertile? I mean,
well, but if you do chalitza, no one else can do yibam if it's a safek chalitza.
Right.
So according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no suffix. It's just like spitting on anyone's shoe, right? It doesn't do anything. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, since it's a suffix, it passes everyone else now from doing yibam. It has an effect because it's.
Right.
It says, so let me read that inside. Sorry, I got myself very confused there. What's going on here? The question is, whether you passel the woman from having yibam from the other brothers, if there are other brothers, and whether it's worth doing it, even if there are no other brothers. According again to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no point because it's definitely not applicable.
So if there's no other brothers, then what happens? She's stuck?
If
there's no other brothers, if he's the only one.
She's putter from everything.
Putter completely.
Right, because there's only one brother who's a saris. The saris is putter from yibam and chalitza, and so she can just marry anyone. There's no yibam at all. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, where you definitely assume he's infertile, or saris, it's the same thing, then she's not passed on to Kohen either, right? Because there's no chalitza.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even a safek. So it would have huge implications in that detail. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, we're around halfway down. Okay, you got it. It says Rav Shmuel Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Abba, Achvad Rav Yehuda bar Zavdi. Okay, whole family relation here, right? Rav Abba, the brother of Rav Yehuda bar Zavdi, Amri Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Okay, so this is the whole statement of Rav Yehuda. Ultimately, we're getting to Rav. Androgynous chayavin alav skila mishnei mikomot. An androgynous, which is a person, and we talked about this in the Mishnah a little bit. Remember, a person who has one with both male and female genitalia, so has a vagina and a penis, or some form of that, is you're chayav skila mishnei mikomot. If a man sleeps with that androgynous, either anally or vaginally, whatever the vagina is, you're chayav skila for sleeping with a man, either place. Right? Mishkav, right, we'll get to what the case is. Well, when that's the case, we'll get what the chiyuv is from. So that's the halacha that Yehuda Rav is quoted as ultimately saying. So that basically you treat an androgynous like a male, for sure. You give skila, so that you obviously are very confident that's what it is. And it's not just like it would be with a regular man anal intercourse, which is the only thing that's possible, a regular man, but in this case it would be mishtei mikomot. So this man essentially has the ability to engage in intercourse with its vagina, or his vagina in this case. Meitve. Well, ask the Gemara, right? What about the following bright? The Braita says, Tosefta from our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, androgynous chayavin alav skila kibiz zachar. An androgynous is treated like a male, and so a man who sleeps with an androgynous is chayav skila, like if he slept with a man. And says the Braita, the medvar memurim according to Rabbi Eliezer b'zachut shelo. That's in his zachut. It's a funny terminology, but it means anally because that's the zachut of, that's what a man shares with an androgynous, right? Avo b'nakvut shelo. But the female sexual organs of this androgynous would be patur, right? So clearly the Braita says, quotes Rabbi Eliezer saying, it's not true, what I just told you. is that androgynous is treated like a male, but only in a way that a male would be treated like a male, essentially. So not in his female sexual organ. Says the Gemara, well, that's true. That is the Breita. But there's another Tana in the Breita. Huda Amar, when Rav asked him that that's not the case, he said, Kiyahai Tana, he's going according to the following Tana. The Tanya, this Breita says, Rabbi Simai Omer, androgynous, chayavin alav skila mishnei mekomot. Rabbi Simai, again, clearly says, an androgynous is chayav skila from two places. And so you're chayav both for, again, I'm going to use the words, a male, vaginal intercourse, and anal intercourse. My time at Rabbi Simai, now what's that based on? How does Rabbi Simai know that there's such a concept that could basically be chayav in two ways when sleeping with an androgynous? What's the reason for that? Amar Rava Bar Hamduri, Rava said, Bar Hamduri Azbali, Bar Hamduri, who's some of his contemporary, explained to me based on the pasuk, a very unusual pasuk, which talks about a man sleeping with a man, that's prohibited. It says, Ve'et zachar lo tishkab, you shouldn't sleep with a man, a zachar, mishkevei isha, the mishkevei, the way you sleep with a woman, but it's plural, right? So what do you mean, the mishkevei, what's the plural there? There's only one way to be chayav, sleeping with a woman, which is, well, take it back, it's not true at all. There's two ways, we're going to discuss that now. But what's the, how can you sleep with a man the way you sleep with a woman, right? It's not the same possibilities. So what is a man who actually you could sleep with in two ways like you would with a woman? Avyomer is androgynous. But the pasuk which says at zachar tishkav mishkavei isha is referring specifically to the very unusual case of a zachar who you could sleep with the way you would sleep with a woman. We're going to ask in a second, how do you know you can't sleep with a man who's a regular man? He's not an androgynous. And he has all the pasuks with him, which would be a little strange, right? Says the Gemara, that's Rabbi Simai, right? That's Rabbi Simai's proof. The Rabbanan, which is Rabbi Eliezer, who disagree, who say, no. It's telling you, it's saying even a person who has two possibilities for intercourse because he's an androgynous, you only are chayiv if you sleep with him the way you would sleep with a regular man, which can only be in one way. Okay, because it says et zachar. Rabbanan, Rabbanan zachar greater than. So according to Rabbanan, how do you even know that you can't sleep with a man? Right? Maybe the Torah is only telling you that a zachar, right? You can only et zachar lo tishkav mishkavei isha is telling you can't sleep with a androgynous in the way you can't sleep with a man. But how do you know that in the way that you would generally sleep with a man? How do you know that you can't sleep with a man who's not an androgynous? That is from, the Bach changed here, that's from Ve'et Isha. Because the Ve'et and the Et includes sleeping with a man. It says in Rabbi Isha Shlok Adarka Benal. How do you know in general, this is something we learned, discussed before, but we're going to keep discussing, that all of the prohibitions of sleeping with a woman, sleeping with a mother, a sister, like all these things apply not just to vaginal intercourse, but also to anal intercourse, or Shalok Adarka. How do you know that's the case? May Ve'isha, that's where, sorry, I did the opposite. Yeah, May Isha, actually, it's not the one. It's from the fact that it uses the word Isha in this context. So that an Isha is compared to an Ish, just like you sleep with a man, Shalok Adarka, you're chayav that way for a woman. Amar Rav Shizma. Now, so that's the halacha, and again, it seems like Yehuda Rav Paskins says clearly that they paskin like this opinion of Rabbi Simai, that Mishkavei Isha refers to a man who has two possible ways of Mishkav, and you'd be chayiv in both ways, which is what our Mishnah said. Says Rav Shizmi, Rav Chizmi.
Isn't there a second pasuk they could have brought?
You're asking what? Is there a second pasuk?
There is a second pasuk. Why didn't they bring that to prove their case?
I don't know the answer, but usually we think of one pasuk for azhara and one for the owner. We usually double up. Meaning in most of the arayot, there's two pasukim.
Gotcha.
Unless there's extra words, and I don't remember all the extra words, but that the existence is not the point. The point is what do you add with it? What's expanded.
Who's liable here? The androgynous or the person who slept with the
Both are
androgynous?
chayav. If it's willful, I mean, both would be chayav.
Consensual.
It's consensual. Thank you. It's a better word.
Willful will be.
But
It was not right. If it was not consensual, right, then the person who's not consensual would not be chayav. But if it's consensual, then they're both chayav. But we're referring here to the perpetrator. Amr of Shizbi, Amr of Chisda. It says Rav Shizbi, Rav Chisda, a fascinating addition to this fascinating case, which is that although Rebbe Eliezer just said, is quoted as saying that, and many other Tanaim, but Rebbe Eliezer was saying that an androgynous is male for all purposes, right? Lo l'kol Amr Rebbe Eliezer androgynous l'chama. It's not true for everything. Meaning, this is where, as we discussed a little bit earlier today, that it's so complicated when we talk about an androgynous as a birya b'chnei atzma and then say it's a man, right? Because for some things, such as sexual intercourse, it could be male or marriage, but for some things it's not, right? And so that's where it says the Gemara, this fascinating halacha, that although Rebbe Eliezer said an androgynous is a zachar, it's not true for everything. Why is it not true for everything? The where am I? Shemata Omer came. Because if you had said that androgynous is basically just a male who has extra genitalia, then b'muktashin yikdash. And if you had an animal that was born this way, which obviously is possible by a man, right? Male, human. It's possible by an animal. So let's say you have a cow that's born with an androgynous, so with both genitalia. Then presumably you can make that kodesh on the mizbeach. And the fact that you can't implies that in some regards this is viewed as being its own thing. Okay. Of course, there's questions about whether it might not be a male or female question. It might be a mum question, right? Because potentially this could be an unusual thing. Tosfos discusses this. It says we could be talking about a bechor as well, because a bechor member is born kodesh. So mum wouldn't also necessarily by bechor, but it would be kodesh. And how do we know that it's not? In Allah delo kadesh, how do we know that an androgynous animal cannot become kodesh for the mizbeach? Tanu Rabbanan, because there's the following bright that says all of the following cases: nirva, muktzah, nevad, etnan, bechir. These are all cases. So nirva is an animal that was slept with by a person, right? Muktzah is an animal that was designated for avodah zarah, so set aside to worship. It wasn't worshipped yet. It was set aside to be worshipped. Nevad, which is an animal that was directly worshipped for avodah zarah. So all these are possible from this mizbeach based on psukim, right? The Torah specifies all of these. Etnan and mechir, which are animals that are given in exchange for sex or in exchange for payment. Mechir might be a kelev. So actually, we're going to discuss this also later. But all these are cases of animals that are possible from the mizbeach. Or, continues the Mishnah, excuse me, the Braita, tumtum vandrogynous, or an animal that is, again, not clear genitalia or ambiguous. All of these birds are tmeim begadim abeit hamliyah. If they are shechted or they're killed, not shechted, they have malika, they're killed without shechita, they are tamei abeit hamliyah. Remember that a bird that's in the vela, unlike an animal that's in the vela, is not tamei by touching it. It's only tamei when you swallow, only in your throat. So these are all tamei like a bird that's in a vela, because they can't be karbanot. And so remember, when you do malika to something that's not a karban, it becomes an vela. Malika is only a way to slaughter an animal that's on the mizbeach. So that's what the Braita says. Rebbe Eliezer argues. Rebbe Eliezer says, tumtum vandrogynous im mitamei begadim abeit hamliyah. Tumtum androgynous are not mitamei abeit hamliyah. So even though Rebbe Eliezer said that an androgynous is considered to be a male for all regards for sexual things, for marriage, in this case, the tumtum is an androgynous is not an androgynous animal is not mitamei abeit hamliyah. Why, says the Braita? Shahi Rebbe Eliezer Omer kol makom sh'nemar zachar nekeva ata motzei tumtum androgynous libinei. The Torah specifies zachar and nekeva, then androgynous and tumtum are included within them, but the oaf hovo nemer b'zachar nekeva yet amotzi tumtum androgynous libinei. By a bird, since the Torah never really describes male and female birds, it doesn't use, if we use the word gender, it doesn't use gender when it talks about birds. So therefore, you can't include a tumtum and an androgynous. And therefore, according to Rebbe Eliezer, there are differences. When you talk about marriage and intercourse, a tumtum and androgynous, especially an androgynous, are considered to be zachari. And therefore, if you sleep with one, if you're a man, you sleep with one, it's prohibited. If you're a woman and they marry you, then you're married, right? And you can eat truma, and you can eat chalitza and ibram and all the regular halachot. But by an oath specifically, because the Torah doesn't use the words zachar nekeva, an androgynous would not be included in the regular rules of an oath, and therefore an androgynous bird cannot become a carbon in any circumstance. Even a carbon that wouldn't matter if it was male or female. this androgynous bird is neither male or female, and therefore cannot become a korban. And if you do malika, if you do malika, it will not be tamid. Correct.
So anytime the Torah describes bird sacrifices, it doesn't say zachar and nekeva. Is that?
It doesn't use the word zachar nekeva. It does talk about man. It talks about torim ubnei yonah.
You also
Right.
can't tell with birds.
That's a male bird.
I don't think it matters if they're male or female.
Doesn't matter.
Right. James is running to show. You can't tell from birds or male. You know more about birds, I guess,
Well, chickens, you can't, it's very hard to tell.
whether they're male or
First,
female.
Until they become adolescent, which is like 4 months.
Can't always even tell. But the Torah does not. So maybe that's why the Torah doesn't say it. But anyway, the Torah doesn't.
That's interesting. I never thought of that.
Let's do two more lines. Then we'll stop. Amar of Nachum bar Yitzchak Afanan Namitin. In fact, we have a Braita which says this also pretty clearly that although Rebbe Eliezer holds that androgynous is zachar, for kudshim, androgynous is not. Rebbe Eliezer Omer hakilayim, cases of a klayim, right? So these are animals that we're talking about that are mixed breed, or treifa, an animal that's born a treifa or becomes a treifa. You would say dofen, an animal that's born through cesarean, right? That does not born vaginally, or an animal that's tumtum and androgynous. All of these animals, lo kedoshin, lo mekachim, they don't become kaddish. They can't make other things kaddish. This has to do with tumura. And Amar Shmuel, well, Shmuel explains, lo kedoshin b'tumura, lo mekachim ba'oseh tumura shmamina. If that animal was kaddish, and so it was born kaddish, let's say, or then became a treifa, in that case, they can't make a tumura. You take the kodesh from them to another animal, and excuse me, and they can't become kodesh, meaning if you have another animal that's kodesh, and you try to exchange it or move the kedusha onto this animal, it doesn't happen. And so basically, this reinforces the halacha that we just said, according to Rebbe Eliezer, that again, the way you treat androgynous depends on the context. Although Rebbe Eliezer paskin, an androgynous human, is a male for all regards, and kai for sleeping with them, and can marry, etc. When it comes to kudshim, the same does not apply. An androgynous does not have an identity necessarily of zachar and nekeva. And kudshim, it's its own birya, and therefore it doesn't become kodesh in this case of the bird, or in this case of an animal, and is treated like something else, like another species or another type of not species really, but another type, and therefore is not included in the regular halachot of kudshim. We'll stop there. Next
Why don't we just finish the?
We can finish, but if James joins tomorrow, I'll do it again. Eliezer says, Eliezer says, like I said, you're chayav skila if you sleep with a zachar, like with an androgynous, like you if you sleep with a zachar if you're male. Tanya Amar Rav, kishahalachti lamot Torah etzel Rebbe Elazar ben Shamoah. I went to learn Torah by Rebbe Elazar ben Shamoah, but he had a very, very protective group of talmidim around him. Chibru alai talmidav, his students ganged up against me basically to protect him from me, I guess to prevent me from getting access. Tarnagolim shabet bukya. We can comment more on Tarnagolim, but I guess Tarnagolim are very protective. When a new hen comes into the nest, they peck them out.
Yeah.
They're
Terrible.
So this is how the students treated me. They didn't let me close to them to even learn. I only learned one thing on my trip. Again, I don't know the bigger context here. What was the one thing I learned? I only learned one thing that I could learn, and be very confident. And that was Rebbe Eliezer Omer, androgynous chayav skila kizachar. This was the one detail I got in that trip, that very ill-fated trip, which is that Rebbe Eliezer says that androgynous, you treat them for sexual intercourse like a zachar, and a man who sleeps with an androgynous, and in our Mishnah said both ways, would be chayav skila, like a regular male. Adjuna love, Allah. Tomorrow morning, so Hanan, 7:30 tomorrow is okay?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Memorial Day, 7:30. I'll send out an email too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we get back to Yevamot tomorrow. Have a good day, everyone.
Have a good day.